Some mornings I walk into this courtroom and I already feel it. The air is different, heavier somehow, like the building itself has already decided today is not going to be easy. I've been a judge for 33 years and I still feel it every single time. My name is Margaret Cole and I have sat behind this bench through more pain than most people carry in a lifetime. I've watched marriages end in 2 short sentences. I've watched parents lose children on a single page of paperwork. I've watched people come through that door holding themselves together with almost nothing, just pride and fear, and the last remaining belief that someone in this room might actually listen. That belief is not naive. That belief is what keeps this system from becoming purely mechanical. And I work very hard every single day to deserve it. If you've ever sat in an uncomfortable wooden chair in a courthouse waiting room watching the clock and rehearsing what you're going to say, then I want you to stay with me right now. Don't go anywhere. Because what happened in my courtroom on a cold Tuesday morning in November is one of those stories I don't think should stay between those 4 walls. I still think about it. I don't think about most matters after they're closed. This one I think about. The courtroom was cold that morning. The heating system in this old building has never once worked the way it should. My clerk Donna had her coat draped over the back of her chair. The fluorescent light above the 3rd gallery row was buzzing softly and flickering the way it always does in November. Outside the tall windows, the sky was the color of old concrete. No sun, just flat gray light pressing down on everything below it. I had 17 matters scheduled that morning. Fines, violations, fees that had been ignored or deferred until they became a different kind of problem. Most of them would move through quickly. Someone walks in, the amount gets read into the record, a payment arrangement gets structured, and everyone goes home. That's how it works most of the time. The system runs, the numbers get processed, people come and go. But one file sat differently in my hands that morning. I can't fully explain it. I opened it, and the first number I saw was $3,847. That's not an abstract violation. That's someone's rent. That's a family's utilities for 4 months. That's the exact amount that turns a manageable life into a crisis. And it was owed by a woman with no prior history at all. Not one violation before the string of citations that began appearing last spring. I looked at the pattern. Every single ticket was from the same location, a hospital on the east side of the city. All of them over 6 months from the same street at the same hospital. That pattern didn't look like carelessness. It looked like a reason. It looked like something that had never been asked about. I set the file down and told myself what I tell myself every time that quiet instinct fires. Listen first. Decide second. I called a short recess. Then Donna knocked softly at my chamber door and told me the woman was waiting in the hallway. She came through the door and I saw her before she saw me. She was wearing a black dress, not a dark office outfit, not the kind of muted clothing people put on when they want to look composed for a judge. This was a funeral dress, long and carefully cut with a small cloth flower pinned near the left shoulder. The fabric had been pressed, but not recently. There was a faint crease across the skirt where someone had folded it and then quickly unfolded it again in the early dark hours of that morning. Her hair was pulled back simply, with a few strands loose around her face. Her shoes were low-heeled and had a thin layer of dust across the toes. Cemetery dust. I've seen enough of it to know what it looks like. She was carrying a clear plastic folder pressed flat against her chest with both hands. She held it the way people hold things they're afraid of dropping. She sat at the defendant's table and placed that folder in front of her and put both palms flat on top of it and went very still. Her face told me things before she spoke one word. It was the face of someone who had been crying for a long time, not recently, deeply, over months, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't live in the skin but behind the eyes. She looked around the courtroom once, slowly, the way people do when they've never been in one before. Then she found my face. She looked at me steadily. She wasn't angry. She wasn't begging. She was just present and carrying something enormous. She was maybe 42 years old, maybe 45. Grief makes those calculations difficult. It can age a face 10 years in a single season. But there was something in her that was very much still upright. She was not collapsed. She had not given up on the idea that this room might be worth showing up for. That posture means everything to me. I've seen it many times over 33 years. I always notice it. I always respect it. The prosecutor that morning was a man named Collins. I'd seen him in my courtroom many times, and he was good at what he did. He wore a clean-pressed shirt and held his materials with practiced organization. Collins was not unkind. He simply trusted the facts on the page more than anything that wasn't written down. That's not a character flaw. That's what a good prosecutor is supposed to do. It's just not the complete job of justice. Collins stood and presented the matter in his usual way, clear voice, organized facts. He read the dates of each citation, the exact amounts, the total. He said the defendant had been sent written notices on multiple occasions. He said the fines had been outstanding for 6 months. He said a payment arrangement had been offered twice and not accepted. He concluded by saying the city's position was that full collection was appropriate and supported by all available documentation. He was correct in everything he said. He was also deeply incomplete in every single thing he said. I let the silence hold for a moment after he sat down. Then I said the woman's name. I said it the way I say every name, quietly, like it matters, because it does. I asked her if she was ready to speak. She looked at the folder under her hands and then back at me. She said yes. Her voice was small, but it was steady. That steadiness told me something important about who she was before she said another word. She said she wanted to explain where the tickets came from. I told her to take her time. She cleared her throat once. She said that from the first week of February to the middle of August, she drove to Mercy General Hospital almost every single day, sometimes 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She parked on Clement Street near the east entrance because she couldn't always afford the garage fee, and the meters on that block had a 2-hour limit. She said she usually stayed much longer than 2 hours. She said she knew the citations were accumulating. She said she just couldn't make herself care about them the way she knew she should have. I asked her why she was spending so much time at the hospital. She looked at the folder for a moment. Then she looked back up and said her husband had been diagnosed with a late-stage cancer of the blood in January. The doctors told them from nearly the beginning that the prognosis was very serious. She said she didn't want him to be alone in that building, so she went every day. She stayed as long as they let her. When visiting hours ended at night, she sometimes sat in the car in the lot just to be near the building where he was sleeping. Now, I want you to stop for just a moment and sit with what I just told you. If you've ever loved someone so much that sitting alone in a cold car outside a hospital at 11 o'clock at night felt better than going home to a quiet house, then you already understand what this woman was doing in that parking lot. You know what that kind of choice costs. You know it has absolutely nothing to do with parking meters. Stay with this story. Because what she said next is where everything in that room began to shift. She reached into the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Parking receipts, hospital visitor log printouts, time-stamped entry cards from the garage, dozens of them, each one a small dated record of her presence. She set them in a careful pile on the table in front of her. Then she said the thing that stilled the entire room. She said her husband had passed away on the night of August 14th. She said she knew the exact date because she had been there when it happened. She said the last 3 citations of the entire case had been issued that same evening at 6:18, at 7:42, and at 9:05. She said she hadn't moved the car. She said she couldn't. She said she was in room 417 and she was holding his hand and she did not leave until he was gone. Collins had been writing on his legal pad. He stopped. He put his pen down carefully. He didn't say anything. The room was the quietest it had been all morning. The woman had both hands flat on the table again. She wasn't performing grief for me. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was giving me the facts in the same careful, steady way she'd probably given them to doctors and nurses and hospital administrators and insurance representatives for the last several months. There is a particular kind of quiet strength in that, in telling the hardest story with a level voice because you've simply told it too many times to fall apart anymore. Then she said one more thing, and this is where the room broke a little. She said she had come to court directly from the cemetery that morning. She said she had buried her husband's mother 2 hours before she walked through my door. The woman had passed away 4 days after her son. She said she was wearing the same black dress from the graveside service. She said she came today because she didn't want a warrant issued and she didn't want any more trouble added to everything she was already carrying. She said she was sorry she hadn't handled the ticket sooner. Then she placed both hands flat on the table one more time and she waited. I asked Collins to come forward. He stood and walked toward the bench, and I could already see in the way he moved that the ground under him had shifted. He was a smart young man. He knew something had changed in that room. I asked him one simple question. I said, "Do these citations carry exact timestamps?" He said, "Yes." I asked him to locate the 3 from August 14th specifically. He found the pages and brought them to me. I looked at the times, 6:18 in the evening, 7:42 in the evening, 9:05 in the evening, 3 separate enforcement officers, 3 passes at the same car on the same street on the same night. I looked at the woman and I asked her what time her husband died. She looked down at the table for just a moment. Then she looked back up at me and she said 11:47. She reached into the folder one more time and she passed forward a small white card. It was from the hospital. On it, written by hand in blue ink, was the time, 11:47 p.m., August 14th. I held that card. The corners were soft from being carried. She had been keeping it close to her for months. She had walked through this day holding that card somewhere in her things. So while 3 city enforcement officers were walking past her car and documenting violations on Clement Street, this woman was sitting in room 417 watching her husband of 20 years take his last breath. The car was not there because she was careless. The car was not there because she was indifferent. The car was there because love doesn't check a meter. Love doesn't come back down to the street because 2 hours are up, and not one piece of that truth had appeared anywhere in the numbers Collins read into this court's record. Here's the part where I need you to pay close attention, because this is where the story becomes about more than one woman and one courthouse. What we had in front of us was a system that had done exactly what it was designed to do and had still gotten it completely wrong. Every notice was sent correctly. Every citation was documented accurately. Every step was followed precisely. And none of it, not one piece of it, had accounted for what was actually happening on that street, at that hospital, in that room. The system was working, and the system was wrong. That is not a contradiction. That is a warning about what happens when we trust the machine more than the person standing in front of it. Keep listening. I looked at Collins and I said, accuracy and completeness are not the same thing. He nodded, but he wasn't finished. He said the law couldn't reasonably make exceptions based on personal hardship. He said that approach would compromise the consistency of enforcement. He said it with genuine conviction. I know Collins. He believed every word of that argument. I gave him 3 full seconds of silence. Then I said, the law is a tool. It was built by people, for people, to serve justice. When a tool begins to injure the very person it was built to protect, a good craftsman doesn't keep swinging. A good craftsman stops. A good craftsman looks carefully at what the tool is doing and asks whether this is still the right use of it. Collins went quiet. He sat down slowly. There wasn't a legal counter-argument available because no good one exists. You cannot argue a person out of basic human sense with procedural language. I looked back at the woman. Her hands were still flat on the table. She had not tried to perform anything for me. She had not appealed to my emotions or asked me for anything beyond a fair hearing. She had simply told the truth and placed her evidence in front of me and trusted that it would matter. I intended to make sure it did. I picked up the gavel. I held it for a moment before using it. I do that sometimes when I want every word I'm about to speak to carry its full weight. Then I began the ruling slowly, one piece at a time. I said the 3 citations from August 14th were dismissed in full. I said no fine should stand against a woman who was at her husband's bedside when he died. I struck the gavel, once. The sound it made in that cold, quiet room was very clean. I said the citations from the preceding months would be reduced under the humanitarian consideration provision available to this court. That provision exists because the people who wrote these laws understood that numbers and human lives don't always translate into each other neatly. It is not a loophole. It is a door built deliberately for exactly this kind of moment. I reduced the remaining balance by 70%. The total owed became $412, payable over 12 months with no interest attached. I struck the gavel a second time and set it down. The woman didn't move right away. She sat very still for a few seconds. Then slowly and with great care, she lifted both hands from the table and pressed them flat against the center of her chest. She sat forward slightly. She closed her eyes. She breathed in, long and slow, and then out. And her whole body shifted with that breath like something that had been wound extremely tight for a very long time had just released one single degree. She opened her eyes and they were full, not tears on the cheek, full eyes held carefully in place. Her chin was steady. Her shoulders did not shake. She just sat there breathing, holding herself with a gentleness that told me she was still treating herself like something fragile and precious that only she could be responsible for not breaking. I let that moment have every second it needed. Then I spoke to her again, not as a judge processing a matter, as a person sitting across a room from another person. I said her name, not the file, not a number, her name. I said she had not been required to come here today. Not one person in that building would have blamed her for requesting a postponement given what she had already done that morning, but she came anyway. She put on that dress and drove across town and sat in that chair and told me the truth. And that choice told me everything important I needed to know about who she was. I told her I hoped she had someone at home waiting for her that evening. I told her I hoped the coming weeks gave her some time to simply be still. I said grief has no proper schedule, and anyone who implies otherwise has never really understood what it takes from a person. She looked at me very directly when I said that. Then she said 2 words, just 2. She said, "Thank you." And those 2 words carried the weight of every single thing she had not said since she walked through my door. Then a voice came from the back of the room. It said, "Your Honor, may I please speak?" I looked up. Standing near the last row of gallery seats was a woman I hadn't noticed enter. She was perhaps 65 years old, wearing a hospital identification badge still clipped to the front of her winter jacket. She said her name was Barbara. She said she was a registered nurse employed on the oncology floor at Mercy General. She said she had been in the courthouse hallway on a separate matter when this hearing was called, and she had recognized the defendant and asked the clerk if she could observe. She said she had known this woman from the 4th floor ward for 6 months. She said the nursing staff on that floor had a quiet habit. On the hardest nights of a long shift, when everything felt like too much, someone would say there's still a woman in 417 who comes every single day. She said that reminder used to be enough to keep them going. I want to say something to you now, directly, the way I'd say it to someone sitting with me at a kitchen table rather than from behind this bench. I do this work because I believe this room is sometimes the last place where someone who has run out of everything else can still find something close to fair. I believed that for 33 years, and I still believe it today. If this story is landing close to something you felt yourself, or close to someone you love, then maybe you found it today for a reason. Stay with it. The rest of the story matters too. 2 weeks after that Tuesday morning, a young reporter who had been seated in the public gallery for a completely different matter wrote about what he had witnessed. He hadn't planned to write anything. He had stayed out of instinct. He filed a short article, roughly 500 words, and posted it at 9 in the evening. By the following morning, it had been read by 43,000 people. By the end of that week, the number had passed 217,000. Donna printed the readership report and left it on my bench one afternoon without a single word. I read it standing up at my window. Then I set it back down and stared at the sky for a long time. Letters began arriving at the courthouse on the 3rd day after the article ran, not emails. Actual handwritten letters, sealed and addressed and mailed to the court. Donna counted them as they came in. 117 arrived over the course of 10 days. Some were long, several pages written on both sides. Some were only 2 or 3 lines, but nearly all of them said a version of the same thing. They said they had lived through something like this. They said nobody had seen them when they did. They said they were glad someone finally had. They were writing letters to a woman they had never met because that woman's story had reached in and touched something in their own. One envelope arrived from a man 2 states away. Inside was a personal check made out to the court for exactly $412, with the defendant's name written in the memo line. The attached note said only, "She shouldn't have to carry this too." I forwarded it through the proper channels because I was required to, but I held that envelope for a full minute before I let it go. I read the note 3 times. Within 4 days of the article going live, 2 women from a local community assistance fund called the clerk's office. They offered to arrange 6 months of grocery delivery at no charge. A neighborhood church reached out about help with utility bills. A grief counseling center offered 12 free sessions with no waiting period. None of these people had ever been in the same room with her. Every one of them had read 500 words and decided that was enough information to act on. They saw her in the only way they could, and they moved toward her. 6 months after that Tuesday, she came back to this courthouse, not for any hearing. She had paid the remaining balance in full 2 months earlier. She came to leave a small envelope for Donna at the front desk. Inside was a handwritten note and a photograph taken on a Saturday morning. She had started volunteering at Mercy General on weekends, not as a patient, as a quiet presence for the families of long-term oncology patients. She sat in waiting rooms with people who had nowhere to be but there. She brought coffee. She understood exactly what it felt like to be in a cold parking lot at midnight because going inside meant going home, and home wasn't ready yet. I wasn't there when she came in that day. Donna told me about it after she had already left, but Donna had looked at her when she handed over the envelope because Donna looks carefully at everything and everyone. And Donna walked into my chambers later that afternoon and she said, "Judge Cole, she's standing differently." That was all she said. Just that. She's standing differently. Donna has been my clerk for 19 years, and she does not say things like that unless she means something specific and true by them. I sat and thought about the woman who had come through my door 6 months before, the dusty shoes, the black dress with the small cloth flower pinned near the left shoulder, the clear plastic folder held flat against her chest with both palms pressed in as if she were keeping something inside herself from getting out, the exhaustion behind her eyes that had nothing to do with how much she'd slept. I tried to place that woman next to the one Donna was describing, and I tried to measure whatever distance had opened up between those two versions of the same person. Before I tell you how this ends for me, I want to ask you something directly and honestly, because this is the question this story keeps asking me. Have you ever known someone who showed up on the worst day of their life and never once announced that that was what they were doing? Who just got dressed and drove somewhere difficult and sat down and handled it without asking anyone to notice? And did you have the ability to see them in that moment, to really see them, and to say out loud that what they were doing had meaning? Because sometimes that is the whole job. One person with enough presence and enough authority to say, "I see exactly what you're carrying, and I want you to know that it counts." Who in your life right now is standing in a cold hallway waiting for someone to say those words to them? After the last matter of that day was settled, I stayed at my bench for a few minutes by myself. The room is always different when it empties out. The light flattens. The sound drops away completely. It gets honest in a way it can't quite manage when people are filling it up. I looked at the empty chairs and the buzzing fluorescent light above the third row that nobody has ever replaced. I thought about her. I thought about the folder and the receipts and that small white card with a time written on it in blue ink, worn soft at the corners from being carried. I thought about 33 years of names, all the files, all the numbers, all the people who walked through that door carrying things that no form or document was ever built to hold. I've made decisions I'm proud of, and others I turn over at night and wish I could rewrite. But the ones that stay the clearest in my memory are always the same kind, the ones where I slowed down, where I put the file down and looked at the actual person in front of me and asked one more question, where I said, "Tell me what happened," and then I waited and I listened. The law is a system, and systems don't feel anything at all. They don't know what it means to bury someone you love in the cold November ground and then put on the same dress and drive across town and sit in an uncomfortable chair because you're scared and you're responsible and you still believe, despite everything, that showing up is worth something. Only people know what that means. And in the end, a system is only as just as the people inside it who choose to keep remembering that. She put on that black dress in the early morning dark. She drove across town with a plastic folder and a stack of time-stamped receipts and whatever was left of her strength. She walked into a cold room 2 hours after leaving a cemetery, sat down in a hard chair, and told the truth. She showed up.